All right, welcome folks. We have reached the last session of our virtual author fair. So thank you all for joining us today. We weren't able to do our author fair last year, so I'm glad that we can do it even if it is virtual this year. I'm so glad that we can connect with our authors and our readers. We are in webinar mode, which means you can see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. So you can sit back and relax. You don't have to worry about your microphone or anything. I'm going to introduce each of our authors. They're going to talk to us, and then at the end, we'll have a Q&A where you can ask questions of the individual authors or present a question to the whole group. And if you have questions at any point during the session, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A. The Q&A is a button. It looks like two little speech bubbles. If you don't see that, you can click the button that says more. It might also be 3 dots. So let's get started with our first author here. So we are talking about history this time. And when I first put out the call for authors, I was actually really surprised at the number of nonfiction submissions we got this year. Normally we get more fiction. So I'm happy that we were able to do an entire session on just the history part, and then we've had nonfiction throughout the day. So our first author is William Hazelgrove. William is the national best-selling author of 10 novels and 7 nonfiction titles. His books have received starred reviews in Publisher Weekly, Kirkus, Booklist, Book of the Month selections, ALA Editor's Choice Awards, Junior Library Guild selections, Library Guild Literary Guild selections, History Book Club selections, and optioned for movies. He's in the Ernest Hemingway Writer in Residence, where he wrote in the attic of Ernest Hemingway's birthplace. He has written articles and reviews for USA Today, the Smithsonian Magazine, and other publications, and has been featured on NPR All Things Considered. The New York Times, LA Times, Chicago Tribune, C-SPAN, USA Today have all covered his books with features. His books Tobacco Sticks, The Pitcher, Real Santa, and Madam President have been optioned for the screen and television rights. His book, Madam President, The Secret Presidency of Edith Wilson, is currently in development, and he has 4 forthcoming books: Sally Rand, American Sex Symbol, Morristown, The Kidnapping of George Washington, The Brilliant Con of Cassie Chadwick, and 160 Minutes, The Race to Save the Titanic. You are a very busy individual. So thank you for spending your afternoon with us.
Right. Well, thanks for having me. And wow, I cannot see my PowerPoint screen here. Which is really strange. Let's see here. You can still see the screen? Yes? No?
You'll have to share your screen again.
Okay, let me just get out of this. Let's see if I can get back to it. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, you see that?
There we go. Yep.
Okay. I'm not sure I can advance it though. From the beginning. Sorry, I just can't seem it's not clicking through the advance. Okay. I'm not sure. Can you guys see that? You can still see it?
We can see the Wright brothers.
Okay, yeah. Good. All right, well, I'm just doing this manually. So if it blows up technically, there's nothing I can do. Anyway, yes, I write narrative nonfiction. I started as a novelist, and then I switched over with this book. And I just thought maybe if I can make that book come back, but I don't know if I can. Can you see Madam President or no?
No.
No.
Yeah, I cannot get to the advanced screen. I don't want to step all over everybody else. So maybe I'll just talk a little bit about it, because I could go into technical hack right now trying to figure this one out, because I have you guys on top of it. That is so bad. At any rate, I'll talk about the Wright brothers' own story. This is one of my titles, and maybe I'll just talk about how I came to this one of many titles. The Wright brothers had a certain story that's been handed down through history. David McCullough, actually his last one came out and sort of retold the Wright brothers' story. So what I try and do with narrative nonfiction is I try and find out the real story. And because I started as a novelist, I novelize it. And basically that allows me to tell it in a very inventive, you were there type of way. It's all footnoted and sourced, but it allows the reader to be engaged. And that's really what narrative nonfiction is. And so with the Wright brothers, what I did was I got the papers of the Wright brothers, which are all bound in about 1,000 pages. And I found out there was a whole nother story there. And in actual fact, what I found out was that Wilbur Wright actually invented the plane, among other things. And there was a whole controversy with the Smithsonian Institute where they actually shipped the plane over to Britain. So this was very intriguing to me. And so when I wrote the proposal, and I'm sure other people may have covered this, or won't cover it. When you write narrative nonfiction, the beautiful thing is you don't have to write the entire manuscript, just write a proposal for the publisher. I gave it to my agent and I said, I think there's a whole other story here. And they signed off on it. And sure enough, it really was or is the real story of the Wright brothers, but history is sort of mythologized over it. So, going through some of my other titles, Madam President, The Secret Presidency of Edith Wilson. Again, what I found out was that she really ran the United States from 1919 to 1921. A lot of history books had played around with this. They sort of nibbled at it, but what I found out was that clearly she was running the presidency because he was very, very sick, Woodrow Wilson. And so again, I just sort of put that forth and said, well, this is the first woman president. And I told it in that sort of novelistic style. And it became somewhat of a, I wouldn't say sensation, but it got a lot of press because a lot of people just don't know this story of Edith Wilson running the country from 1919 to 1921. So that's what I kind of do. I kind of take a corner of history and then novelize it, tell it in a way that people can see it dramatically. Another book would be Al Capone in the 1933 World's Fair, which again, I was fascinated with Devil in the White City, and then I found out Chicago had another fair, and so I said, well, nobody really knows about this fair, and what I found out was they had to get rid of Al Capone before they could have the fair. So again, these are all a sort of corner history that I find a lot of people haven't really investigated. And then my latest book that's out September 1, I'll just jump to that, is 160 Minutes, The Race to Save the Titanic. Well, you think, well, what's been told about Titanic that can be told again? And actually what I found out was that there was a whole story with the wireless telegraphy that had just come on. It was like the internet of the time and a personal computer of its time. And this really was a whole nother side of the story nobody had told it. And I found out that there was, as with other historical events, there was an immense amount of mythology right through the movie on Titanic that simply wasn't true. And so that's how I went at it. And it's amazing how many big topics you can go after and find a piece in that either has been sort of pushed down, mythologized, or just not dealt with. And that's what I did. I wrote a book on Teddy Roosevelt called Forging a President, where, again, the mythology is he was this big blustery guy when in fact he was this sickly asthmatic who went west for 3 years, and that really created who he is. And so that in my little corner of narrative nonfiction is what I do. I sort of take a piece of history and spread it out. And to me, it's a lot of the same literary techniques as writing a novel come to bear, but I do have a master's in history, so I do use a lot of those skills. But what's great about it is the story's really there, and then you just sort of bring it to life for people. And with my hobble PowerPoint, I guess that's going to be about it. So.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
All right, so our next author is Anna Marie Kukec Tomczyk. Anna Marie was born and raised in Chicago and has also lived in Evergreen Park and Elk Grove Village. Her byline has appeared in the Daily Southtown Daily Herald, Chicago Tribune, and Chicago Sun-Times, as well as U.S. News and World Report, ABA Journal, and other publications. We Are Eagles is her first book. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I noticed the Wright brothers story is still up, but that's not my book. But it sounds like a wonderful book, William. I'm glad you had a chance to talk with that. And thank you all for including me on this panel as quite a wonderful group of talent here. This is actually my first book. So I've spent most of my career as a journalist and magazine writer. And so I had gotten to that point where I wanted to just dive into a book. And I was talking to Sister Beth Murphy, who's with the Dominican Sisters of Springfield. And she had proposed a couple of ideas. Hey, how about this? How about that? And it turned out this one was kind of an interest to me because it kind of focuses on the Aurora-based Dominican Literacy Center. And it's about 25 years old, and it was coming up on that 25th anniversary when I went there to start talking to the sisters about the center. And I thought, well, that would be interesting to kind of just span 25 years of when it actually started back in the 1990s until the current time. And so I thought, well, why not talk to some of the students that had been there? And most of them, if not all, had been immigrants. At the very beginning, they were all immigrants from Mexico, but in later years, up until that 25th anniversary, they literally had students from 30 different countries. So I thought I'd focus on the earlier students that kind of helped grow the center, because even though a lot of these women that I had talked to were not in a so-called graduating class, it was kind of hard to time the chapters because I didn't want it just to be separate essays on each of the people. I wanted to try and group it some way with the chapters to make it sound like, well, you could either read it straight through from chapter to end, or you could actually do it by person, because I had the person's name in each title. And I credit my husband with helping me form that idea to try and get it on the life cycle of an eagle. Everything from being born into the nest and to they leave the nest, and then later on when they start soaring with their accomplishments. And I wanted to stick with something that was inspirational too, because it seemed like every one of these women I talked to had inspirational things to talk about. And their lives almost parallel what happened with the center from the time it started, from being in the basement of a church to now a much bigger building out in Aurora that, you know, has had close to 3,000 students there over the years. So a lot of the women that I talked to had, you know, the immigrant type of steel where they bootstrapped their lives, got up, they had some dreams or some goals in mind and they did them. One of the women, Maribel, seemed to strike me quite a bit simply because she came here to meet up with her husband who already got a job, and then basically had a relationship where he's very abusive to her and beat her badly. But Maribel was very open about that sort of thing and told me quite a bit of details. And she also had like a 4-year-old daughter that she eventually left her husband, got a divorce. And then she was going to the center here to try and learn some English. And it turned out to be that the better her English got, the better jobs she eventually got. And then she was able to save money, got her own home, got a car. Some of the milestones a lot of us take for granted, or we do it at a much earlier age. So Maribel then started having some other dreams, and later on, she turned out she started her own business, a restaurant out in the Naperville area. And she also ran the Chicago Marathon. So there's quite a few women in the book that have that theme where they go for their goals. There's some other people too that are in there that maybe we could all identify with, that like Blanca, for example. She came over, had a family, and got into housekeeping like a lot of immigrants do, but she wanted to be a boss, and she became a supervisor later on. And she had a 20-year career with the company until the company was downsizing during that recession we had a while back. And then she had to make changes in her life, like a lot of people have, right, during those years. So even though a lot of these women were immigrants, they certainly showed a lot of the same ideals and dreams and goals that many of us do. And we either have a lot of immigrant relatives or friends that also have expressed certain things like that as well. So it seems like if you read it through, and it's sort of like all these universal type of emotions and dreams that have happened, that people actually do like bootstrap their lives into a better area. And I was thinking of just reading very quickly the first chapter. It's just basically about, a little bit about what I told you about Maribel. And I'm going to also share my screen too, so you'll be able to hopefully see some of the women I'm talking about. Maribel's actually the one with the tan jacket, second from the right. And I start out with, in 1992, Maribel left Tuxtla, just east of Mexico City, with her 4-year-old daughter, Mary, because it was her duty to be with her husband, and he looked for work in the Chicago area. She was committed to keeping her marriage together in the United States, a country where she believed the American dream was possible. She also was eager to celebrate Christmas in this country. The streets of Aurora, about 40 miles southwest of Chicago, were fluffed with freshly fallen snow that gently formed pillows on top of the holiday lights. The scene at dusk was magical, and Maribel deluded herself into thinking that the same magic could somehow change her marriage. But that holiday magic soon faded. The three of them began living with friends to save money, and her husband insisted that Maribel stay indoors 24 hours a day to take care of Mary. He said it was for her own safety in a strange country, so she kept telling herself that such confinement was supposed to be normal, but then wondered about the freedom that the United States is supposed to offer. Soon her husband was coming home later and later and acting strangely, and he also began hitting her so hard that one night the neighbors on the first floor came to see if everything was okay. He threatened that if she opened the door to anyone, that they would be taken away because they were illegals. And instead, her husband kept the door closed so no one would see Maribel's wounds. He told the concerned neighbors that Maribel fell and hurt herself and she was all right now. The neighbors hesitated and asked Maribel directly through the door as if she was okay, and she had planned to call the police if she did not answer. Her husband held Maribel's hair tightly and then pulled out at the roots. He just shoved her to answer. Quote, "I'm fine, thank you," Maribel answered with a strained voice. What Maribel thought was the American dream continued to dissolve with each verbal jab that led to his repeated kicks to her face. Her blood splattered the walls, her nose broken, her eyes were blackened. The beating continued along the threats. He warned that if she left him, her family would suffer the consequences. He threatened to burn down her mother's home, or he would pay a friend to rape her younger sister, or he would get someone to beat up her brother. Each threat took Maribel shook her to the core. So she remained silent. She buried the pain deep inside and never told her family that this nightmare had replaced her American dream. One day, Maribel learned that about her husband's affairs, and summoned the courage to finally confront him. It just led to more beatings. He then accused Maribel of being the one unfaithful. It continued until she cried and bled more, and her husband later claimed the money he earned it was not enough to feed them, so he needed to be away most of the time. When her purse was empty, Maribel resorted to borrowing money from his relatives just to buy food. Then one day, Maribel came across a magazine article about domestic abuse. She then hid the magazine and only read it when her husband was away. The article advised women to store clothes, important documents, and some money in a hiding place in case of an emergency. Maribel then packed some clothes for both her and Mary and hid them. She stopped asking her husband anything and was almost relieved that he was gone nearly every day and night. Her heart began to race just thinking about her escape. Then she froze. If she did leave him, would he find her? Would he become so enraged that he would literally beat her to death? And what would happen to her daughter, Mary? One night when Maribel was sleeping, Mary crept under the covers and cuddled with her mother in the bed. Her husband then unexpectedly came home late and sucker punched the sleeping Maribel in the face. Little Mary woke up in sheer terror and raced from the bedroom. Maribel felt one powerful blow after another, coming in rapid succession. When the punches subsided, Maribel was forced to sleep with her husband. The next morning, Maribel's nose and mouth were so swollen that her left eye was fully closed and her right eye was red. Maribel looked into the mirror on the wall and searched for her face. It wasn't staring back. She cried for being too cowardly to defend herself, too weak to fight back, and not smart enough to do something about it. And Maribel saw that no other way out and contemplated slitting her wrists. She even set aside which kitchen knife she would use. And before she would end it all, she needed to take one last look at her daughter, who was sleeping in bed with the moonlight covering her sweet face. And for just a moment, Maribel felt a sense of peace while looking at a part of herself that would carry on in the world. Just then, Mary just woke up unexpectedly and crying and asking her mother to never abandon her. Did Mary somehow know that Maribel was about to do? After all, her little Mary was mature beyond her years and always looked out for her. That's when Maribel decided to put the knife away. Then, during the last struggle she had with her husband, when his hands were locked around Maribel's neck, she felt strangely that this could be the swift solution to all the problems that she said were all her fault. But she could not die, not now. Her daughter deserved a better life. After years of being so progressively worse and living with the constant fear that he would kill her, Maribel discarded her strong religious commitment to marriage, grabbed her emergency bag of clothes, and escaped with Mary. She then got an order of protection against her husband in a legal system she knew little about and did not know the language. So that is basically the first that was the first chapter of the book, but otherwise, you know, I'm certainly open to any questions regarding how I wrote it and how everything else went with it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Pull up the next thing here. All right, our next author is Andrea. So Andrea Friederici Ross is the author of Edith, the Rogue Rockefeller McCormick, published last year by Southern Illinois University Press. She first learned about Edith while doing research on her first book, Let the Lions Roar, The Evolution of Brookfield Zoo. Andrea spent 10 years working on her book about Edith, determined to tell the fascinating story of a forgotten Chicago woman. Andrea lives in Elmhurst and works in a local grade school library, helping young children develop a love of learning. Welcome.
Thanks, Jazz. I'm happy to be a part of this panel and happy you guys are doing this. It's nice at the library. Yeah, so I decided to go low tech today, but this is my book. It's Edith, the Rogue Rockefeller McCormick. And I first learned about Edith about 20 years ago when I was writing Let the Lions Roar, the history of Brookfield Zoo. And I guess I can admit at this point that I kind of went for all the low-hanging fruit at that point about Edith. I knew all the scandalous things about her. I knew that she was John D. Rockefeller's daughter and that she had married into the McCormick family of Reaper fame. So when she married, she was said to be the richest woman in the United States. And I knew that by the time she died, that money was all gone. And I knew things like she had proclaimed to be the reincarnation of King Tut's child bride, and that she spent 8 years studying in Zurich with Carl Jung, and she had kind of some outlandish beliefs. So that's kind of where I left it with Let the Lions Roar. And, you know, the first sentence of the book is an unusual woman made Brookfield Zoo possible. So fast forward past, you know, raising a couple of kids, and I'm finally at a point where I can have thoughts of my own again. And I start ruminating about Edith. And I've been reading a lot of historical fiction, which I really enjoy. And I thought, boy, if only I knew an interesting person to write about, maybe I could try some historical fiction. And I thought, aha, Edith, here's my unusual character, right? So I started researching her. And as I researched her, I realized that maybe I had given her kind of short shrift in the Zoo book. Yes, she's a fascinating character, and she's so quirky and has very unusual beliefs. But as I dug deeper and deeper, I realized that she was also a lot of other things. She was a great philanthropist. Yes, she gave us Brookfield Zoo. She donated the land where Brookfield Zoo sits, and it was specifically for the purpose of creating a zoo. But she did a lot of other things too. She was a driving force between the beginning of Chicago Grand Opera, and she and her husband Harold built an infectious diseases institute in Chicago after her first son, Jack, died of scarlet fever. And it was at that institute that they discovered that they isolated the strand that creates scarlet fever, and they helped curb that disease. And she and Harold endowed the Journal for Infectious Diseases, which is still going strong. And then later in life, she started a real estate firm in Chicago, and she developed acres and acres of land. I mean, just millions and millions of dollars worth of land. So she had all sorts of plans for the future. She was planning, she had one home at 1000 Lakeshore Drive and another home up in Lake Forest. And both of those were intended to be museums for the city of Chicago. So she spent her life collecting great objects, including Napoleon's silver service and jewels that had once belonged to Catherine the Great, and all these amazing treasures. And her intent was that they be shared with the city of Chicago after she died. But her life did not exactly turn out as planned. The Great Depression intervened there, and she was left holding thousands of acres of land that nobody could buy. And the spots that they had already sold, they had finance for the buyers as well. And then all these buyers couldn't afford their mortgages anymore, and Edith was left holding the bag. So her financial downfall was tremendous. That began in about 1929, although a little earlier, 1927, when the real estate market tanked. And then she was also diagnosed with breast cancer. So she died in 1932, before Brookfield Zoo opened. She did not see the culmination of a lot of her dreams, but her life was fascinating. And as I learned all these things about her, it became, I kind of went on a crusade to tell the story of this woman who had been forgotten, of this woman who tried really hard to raise the cultural life of Chicago, and to kind of, her intent was actually to move society along its evolutionary axis in terms of her work with Carl Jung. So she underwrote a lot of his translations. And she underwrote also James Joyce as he wrote Ulysses. So she was a little bit of the Forrest Gump of Chicago at the time. So it took me a long time to write this, in part because her papers were destroyed after she died. So while the Rockefeller family archives have, boxes upon boxes upon boxes of folders for everybody else in the family, as do the McCormick family archives, everything is saved, every last coal receipt and everything is saved. But Edith's files are very, very thin. So the question is, why was it destroyed? and what could I find out there? So it became kind of a scavenger hunt to find what I could, and took me to archives and historical societies and libraries and so on, all over the Chicago area and beyond. I actually ended up in Zurich, tracing her steps there as well. So it turned into a passion project, and it's been a great ride. So yeah, bringing history to life. It's what I tried to do with Edith's story, and as I said, I wanted to write historical fiction. That didn't pan out in the end, but all of the workshops and classes and so on that I took in order to try to write historical fiction, I think helped turn the book into more of a story than just a straight biography. So yeah, that's Edith's story. I hope you're interested in her, and I love talking about her. So I appreciate this opportunity to present her to you today. So thank you.
Great, thank you. So we have one more author, and then we will get to our question and answer section. So a lifelong Chicagoan, Ellen Shubart spent more than 2 decades as a journalist, taught at the college level for a number of years, and ended her career as an advocate for sustainable city planning. A historian by training with master's degrees in U.S. history and historic preservation, she has written 4 books, including this one, What's with Chicago, Images of America, Glencoe, Illinois and Taylor Street, Chicago's Little Italy. In retirement, Ellen is a docent at the Chicago Architecture Center and gives tours of Chicago architecture on the city's streets and via boat on the Chicago River. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jez. I really appreciate it. I am in awe of these other people. I think it's just phenomenal how much history is being written about. My book is a little different. I'm going to put on a PowerPoint, and if you listen while I talk, while I do this, it's a look at an illustrated history of the city of Chicago. And whoops, I'm having troubles with that. Let's try again. No, this is not what I want. So I'm screen sharing, and I'd like to bring up, my slideshow. And can everybody see that? Does that work?
No, we are not seeing your slideshow.
You're not seeing it. Okay.
See your email.
You're seeing my email? I don't want you to see my email. I want you to see this. Share.
There you go.
Yeah, it says screen sharing.
Yes.
Okay, and then it's a slideshow from the beginning.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, so this is the book. It's called Chicago, an Illustrated Timeline from Mudhole on the Prairie to Midwest Metropolis. It's published by Reedy Press out of St. Louis, and this is my second book for the same publisher. They asked me to write this one after I wrote the first book, which is called What's with Chicago. And exactly what it is it's what it says it is. It's an illustrated timeline, 140 different pages of dates with illustrations, charts, maps, all that kind of thing. And the biggest question that I usually get asked is, how did you figure out which dates to put in? And it was a good quarter of the preparation for the book was sitting around and figuring out which dates you wanted to put in there and which you didn't. And my basic criteria is that it had to have some impact on the city. I took more sociological than political events. And I looked at geographic and economic changes, but I also, because I'm a docent at the Architecture Center, I also did a lot of architectural design advantages, because, you know, we're the home of the skyscraper, the birth of the skyscraper, and I wanted to share that with people. So very quickly, what the city of Chicago kind of considers its milestones, I think you can see on the flag of Chicago. The top and bottom blue lines are for the stem, North Branch, South Branch, and the lake, all of our water issues. The white, it's a little hard to see on this slide, but the white up at the top is the north neighborhoods. The one in the middle is the west, and the bottom is the south side of the city, because we always considered we didn't have a east side. And the stars there are the most important things. Now, the flag doesn't get invented until the 20th century, and when it was first formed, it only had 2 stars on it. And then they added the second 2. After Fort Dearborn and the Chicago fire, they added the 2 fairs, our World's Fairs. But I would argue, and I think the book argues, that these events are not exactly what changed Chicago. And instead, I'm going to give you 2 dozen dates that I think better show actually what did change Chicago. And the first one is not the setting up of Fort Dearborn, which is just the extension of the United States Army out to as far west as they could go, but the treaty in 1833 that forced the removal of indigenous peoples. This is the basis of what happens here, because there was a flourishing culture. They were traders, they were farmers, they were gatherers, and the United States promises a whole lot of stuff that they never give, and they just push these people who are of the Ojibwa, Odawa, and Potawatomi groups out of here. It's actually 15 different tribes, but those are the 3 major ones. And they leave us with a big legacy, including our name, Chicago, which in the Potawatomi language means skunk town. In other languages, we think it's the Illini, it means stinky onion. So either way, we stink. We're a city of bad smellers, if there was something. I think much more important than some of this other stuff is 1848. We begin to develop transportation. It's the first time the trains get here. We complete in 1848 the Illinois and Michigan Canal, which allows the boats to get here. You probably don't even know that, but from 1848 to 1910, we had the busiest railway transportation in the United States. We also had the most sail and then steam transportation on the river. Our port in 1872 did as much business in terms of numbers of ships that arrived here as New York and San Francisco combined. It's also the beginning of industrialization. Edith McCormick's family opens up the McCormick Reaper factory here, and the Board of Trade opens up. 1848 is a big year. And then I'll concede to the flag that the fire is important. Yes, it burns everything down. Yes, it sets the stage for the beginnings of rebirth. Although I would argue that 1871 is the burning down. You really don't get back to building again until the 1880s. It just didn't happen overnight, as most people think in the mythology. European immigration is huge and makes the city a United Nations of sorts. This is where we get the Irish fleeing the potato famine, the Germans fleeing a lot of the unification fights in the country that's going to become Germany. Ditto with the Italians who come fleeing what was happening in their soon-to-be country of Italy. And then later on, as we get to the turn of the century, the Eastern Europeans. Yes, I would acknowledge that 1893, the Columbian Exposition, is very important, but I think you have to understand that at that same time, other things are happening, including a lot of labor unrest. Chicago was known for its labor unions and our problems here. For the Second Industrial Revolution, where we go into the stockyards and all of what it creates, which actually starts much earlier, but then we get into things like clothing, and we also are going to begin to develop all sorts of food processing things. 1893 also is the beginning of the era of the golden age of architecture. It's the year of the Reliance building on State Street, if you're a Chicagoan. And this is the beginnings of the Marquette building on Dearborn Street, where you're using a metal frame, not a wooden frame. And that means you can go up and up and up. In the 20th century, we have the reversal of the Chicago River, which is one of the modern engineering miracles. It allows us to develop because we're no longer drinking polluted water. Between 1915 and 1975, the Great Migration, which brings in the African-American community to Chicago in two different waves, but it is fundamental to the formation of the city of Chicago. The 1919 race riots, I think had we not gone through 2019, many people wouldn't remember it, but it is the hardening of the segregation in this city. From 1919 onward, we really have the beginnings of what we all know as the separate but equal development of the area called Bronzeville, which then is going to go on to become the Black Belt, it was called in the 1930s when they wrote about it for Roosevelt University. I would argue that the 1932 election of Anton Cermak was extremely important to the city of Chicago. And that's because he's the one who's going to break the back of the Republican Party. Since 1932, we have not had a mayor who was not a Democrat. And that continues until today. And I think the nuances of all of that which follow, which probably everybody who's listening knows all about, you know, the development of the Democratic Party, clout, started earlier, but Cermak is the man who created the machine that encompasses African Americans, immigrants, and voting together, which continues until we get the election of Harold Washington, when it begins to splinter a bit. But that election is extremely important. And then the picture that I have here, regional suburbanization, is really something that affects Chicago greatly. It's the period of flight from the city at the beginning, and then towards right before the pandemic, we get a reversal where we were having an influx into the city, into the downtown of population, while we're having a huge drain of Black residents who are leaving the city. And surprisingly, maybe to you, by 2020, a lot of people statistically were saying that Chicago was the only other community on the Northern Hemisphere that had the potential to be a mega city meaning a population of 15 million, not in the city proper, but in the region, which is defined by the census as running from Gary all the way up to Racine. Potential mega city. Why? We were building, we were expanding, we were bringing people in, we were bringing new buildings, and I just love to show this a picture of one of our newest skyscrapers, St. Regis Tower by Jeannie Gang, the tallest building in the world, designed by a woman. Yeah. But we don't know what the city is going to how it's going to come out of the pandemic. It's just, I don't think anybody's got a good roadmap on that. So I stopped my book, both because of the publishing date and because I just don't know what we can say about it. And I think we've already seen the first iteration of, we thought things were coming back to normal, and then boom, we get the Delta virus, and we think things are going to come back again. Who knows? So thank you very much for listening about this. My question to you would be, do you agree, or what stars would you put on the flag? And like I said, when the flag was originally formed, it only had 2 stars. We've added 2 more. We could add whatever. And then at the same time, I would say to you that people wanted to put a 5th star up for the Cubs when they won the World Series, and that didn't work. But you know, we could find something else if we really wanted to. So I'll stop sharing. And thank you very much for listening. And it's back to you.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to mention a couple of programs we have coming up because they connected throughout this. I was grabbing links. First, if you want to learn more about the Titanic from William, he will be back on November 3rd. So we'll get to hear all about that. And then we have a program on the Chicago fire on October 6th. It is the, I believe, 150th anniversary this year. And then a little sneak peek, our winter theme is build, and we're going to be covering a lot of Chicago architecture. So especially talking about how we invented the skyscraper and how do you do that on a swamp. So we'll be able to talk about some of these topics a little bit more. And let's see, we've got some questions here. My first question is for Anna Marie. So I wanted to know if it was okay to share the name of the restaurant. If that's a privacy thing, I won't say it, but I'm pretty sure I know which one it is.
No, it's not private. She's had the restaurant for quite a while in the south end of Naperville. It's called Totapas. It's in a strip mall, just off, I would say east of Route 59. But she's been doing very well, and she's had like a lot of Yelp, kudos and everything. And since somebody noted that I I didn't exactly share my screen properly.
Shared it for you.
Just a second, let me try that again, just so you can get a look at all the women. And then
yes, I shared it for you.
Oh, you did? Okay. Because I noticed I saw it, and somebody wrote up and said, "Oh, I don't see your slide." But
because you were prepared and you sent it to me ahead of time.
Oh, that's good. It helps me with all the technical glitches. But no, her restaurant is, she's been doing very well with that. And I mentioned about her doing the Chicago Marathon. And of course, she's never run at all in her life. And she did that as part of a fundraiser at her church, actually. So she joined in with a group of people from that and raised money for another country. So that was very important to her. And then she went back to Mexico after that because she felt like she was so blessed with the things in her life now, especially, raising her daughter, having her own home finally after moving quite a bit here and there, and a car and everything else and after the marathon, she actually went back to Mexico and brought gifts to pass out to children. And she had given her sister, who had a shop there, to buy sweaters or jackets or shoes for people who were poor and needed something. So she felt like she had to give back in that way. So, but her restaurant's doing very well. It's actually right around a strip mall where there's a Jewel and some other stores in the area. So.
Yeah, it's on the corner of Aurora and Ogden. It is down the street from me. It is my favorite restaurant in town.
Oh, really?
So when I heard you mention that, I'm like, I need to look this up and see if it's hers.
Well, actually, speaking of small world, I believe I knew Ellen for a number of years ago, and weren't you on the board with the Chicago Headline Club?
Yes, I was.
Yes. I kind of thought so. I remember you from that time. It's been many years.
It has. And we both look just the same, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that had to be like in the 1980s and 1990s. I think.
So we have a question here from the audience. How do you find subject matter? Do you have a researcher working with you? And would also like to know how each of you were discovered. So whoever would like to go first.
I don't know what discovered means, but if you mean, how did you find a publisher, or did the publisher find you? As Anne Marie just pointed out, I was a journalist, and I gave that up a while ago after I went to, when I got my degree in historic preservation, but I kept in touch with people. And another woman who is also a docent at the Architecture Center is an author, And she said, I heard you write. Would you be interested in writing a book for these people? And that's how I hooked up with this publisher. Is she put the two of us together. And no, I don't have a researcher. That's what I do. I'm fascinated in how William and Andrea got all their original sources, because I think that's the toughest stuff. But today, not only can you get facts off the internet, because you can get into libraries and read books online, which you couldn't years ago. That is a real big boom as to how you can find things that, you know, you used to have to schlep to a library in some far-flung town, and you don't have to do that as much anymore.
Well,
I am also, yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I'll chime in too and say, oh, no, I do not have a researcher. And, you know, I don't think that I want one, because part of it is what you come across along the way. I'm researching a new person right now, and in the process, I'm reading the journal of a friend of hers. And you start to see all the same names in the process. And in fact, there are a lot of the same names that I came across with Edith, because it's kind of a similar crowd. But it's things that details that you don't think are important until much further down the road. And then oh, I've seen that name before. Where did I see that name? And then you pull it together, and it's a process. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. It's like picking up a little clue here and a little clue there and putting it all together. And then eventually this image of a person becomes clearer and clearer. And I don't know how people do it who have researchers. I would love somebody to help with all the footnoting and have somebody help organize all my materials, because that's always my biggest challenge. But yeah, to me, the hunt is really the funnest part of the game.
I had the same question that Ellen had, which is, how do you get a hold of so many primary resources? I think we're frozen.
Take that one, or
sure. Yeah, I'll just dive into what the others were saying. Everything's digitized now, so it's a lot easier to research these topics. Like with the Wright brothers, I was really lucky that they'd actually bound up all their papers. But with, say, Titanic, they had all the digitized proceedings from the Senate trials, the Senate investigations that they had after the catastrophe in the United States and Britain. So, you know, you can just download it all basically and get it. I think once upon a time, historians really traveled around a lot and, you know, would have to go to all these places, but there's so much digitized now. It's really unbelievable how much material you can get online. I just did a book on Scott Fitzgerald, and you can just go to the Princeton Library, and there are all his papers. You can look at the Great Gatsby manuscript online, and you know, which is amazing that you don't have to travel to all these places to get all these primary sources. And as far as being discovered, I was a novelist before I was a narrative nonfiction writer. So, you know, 200 rejection letters later, you know, a small press took a chance, and then I went with Random House. So I think that's probably a pretty classic story for most writers. But I will say, I think narrative nonfiction is much more friendly to the writer in terms of you don't have to produce an entire manuscript before you sell it.
Well, and I'll just add to that a lot is available online, but when you're looking for some of the figures that have been lost to history, it isn't online. So I had to physically go to the family archives for the Rockefellers and the McCormicks and other people, and actually look through every single piece of paper in there to see what was there. And not only, you know, would I look through Edith's little files, but I would look through Her husband Harold's letters to his sister, because that's a great source, right? Of, you know, he's going to tell his sister things that he's not going to tell anybody else. In the case of more obscure figures, you do have to really dig pretty deep.
Great.
Well, in the case with my book, there was research done on, you know, the immigration population coming into the area, census work, some things like that that I worked on. But the bulk of the book on mine was mostly interviews, and it's mostly like, even for Maribel, I went to her restaurant early in the morning before she opened up, and just talked to her for a couple of hours. And I went back, oh God, more than a dozen times, just to, you know, flesh out what I could on her story. And as the other women that were featured in the book too, you know, I would meet them either at their home or at the library, or, you know, even a coffee shop or something, just to talk to them a few times, get what I could to flesh out. But, you know, it almost was just as a regular journalist would do, simply because none of them knew me, and they had to trust me. And I think that was the biggest thing I had to overcome, was for them to trust me enough to tell their story, and then, you know, go over things with them to make sure that they were comfortable with it. And that, especially in Maribel's case, where she's detailing a lot of intimate things in her life that, you know, would not otherwise have been known. And so I credit her and the other women for providing, you know, that inside look onto them. But, you know, just like Ellen said, it's sort of like that journalism background that kind of helped in that, and try and put, you know, the book together. And as far as being discovered, I'm still waiting. So, you know, it does well, but, you know, I don't know what people mean by being discovered either. It's sort of like, you know, I've been out working as a journalist for, you know, a number of decades now. And, you know, people know the name Kukec possibly from when I was at the Daily Herald, or at the Daily Southtown, and stories in other places. But then I get married and I change my name and I confuse everybody. So, but actually I think a lot of writers don't always feel that way, and they still keep working on those next books because they want to work on them. So I certainly feel like I'm in good company here, because many of you have written more than I have. I'm just starting out, so I'm sort of the newbie of the group here.
All right, we have time for just one more question. We do have a question here for William. What was the biggest surprise fact you found out about the Wright brothers?
That would probably be that Wilbur Wright, you know, invented that plane with a man named Octave Chanute from Chicago. When they did all the head-cracking physics and worked that out, and that Wilbur Wright was more of a gifted mechanic. The whole mythology of them being the Wright brothers and 50% partners really started with a guy named Fred Kelly, who published a book in 1943 on the Wright brothers, authorized by Orville Wright. The reason the history was so fudged was that Wilbur died 9 years after they flew in Kitty Hawk in 1903. And so 30 years later, Orville wrote this, or with Fred Kelly, had this biography come out that basically said he did most of the heavy lifting in the inventing of this plane. And also the photo in Kitty Hawk in 1903 shows Orville at the controls. But the truth was Wilbur Wright invented that plane. He was sort of a savant who, with virtually no engineering training, doped out the physics of flight. And like I said, the Smithsonian magazine, I wrote a big article for them, and they backed me up on the whole thesis. And basically, I got contacted by a lot of aeronautic historians who said, yeah, you're right. We all knew this, but history has just always called it the Wright brothers. So that was probably the biggest surprise.
Great, thank you. So you can find information on today's authors and links to their books on the main author fair website, which is elmlib.org/authorfair. All of these sessions were recorded, and as soon as we have them up on our YouTube, I will also link them on that page. and you'll be able to watch all the ones you weren't able to watch earlier today. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for sharing your stories and your books. And thank you for everyone who attended as well.
Thank you very much, Jess.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, have a nice
Thanks for having
afternoon,
me.
everyone.
Bye-bye.